How are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Matt, the podcast dude, otherwise known as Matt Halloran. And Matt is like the guy in the wealth management world when it comes to podcasting. And if you want to find Matt, you can find him here at proudmouth.com. And we're going to talk about the wonderful world of podcasting and why you, as a contractor, would want to be doing it in your business. So let's bring Matt on and we'll start the conversation. Hey, Matt, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, man. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I met Matt at this conference a couple of weeks ago, and he looks almost exactly like one of my best friends. So I had to go up and start talking to him. And we got into this conversation about podcasting, and I found out he's like the podcast god of the wealth management world. So, Matt, why podcasting and why would you want to do it?
So number one, it is easier for referrals to refer to a podcast than call my guy. And I can't really stress that enough. Very few people nowadays will answer the phone or want to just pick up the phone to call somebody's referral. What they want to do is they want to do their research. So what we're finding is the more social proof you have in a palatable opt-in manner, which is what podcasting is, just helps you build relationships with your ideal clients and prospects in a just much more convenient and, again, opt-in sort of manner, instead of another email campaign or a mailing campaign, which doesn't really seem to work as well as it used to. I'm not saying I'm saying you still have to do some of those things, but using your voice and spreading your thought leadership is an amazing way to build relationships with your ideal client and even pre-qualify them, which I think is really important too.
So it seems there's several ways doing podcasts. Obviously, you can do a solo cast and you can do an interview podcast. So if you were to advise someone in the construction world, let's say a home builder, about doing, they want to say, well, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Would you advise them to do a solo cast? Or would you advise them to do an interview show?
I'm really opinionated about this, man. So I'm just going to warn you, qualify that head. I don't like solo casts. I don't, they're honestly not as listened to as an interview style. So let's talk about construction workers or construction contractors or anything along those lines. So your first 3 or 4 podcasts needs to be somebody interviewing the primary either salesperson or founder of the organization about their story. Why are they doing this? What makes them unique and different? Is it process? Is it skill? Is it technique? Is it experience? Those are really important to get your first 3 or 4 podcasts to distill your thought leadership and what makes you unique and different. Because, man, what will happen is somebody will come in at episode 50 and be like, well, who the heck's this person? So they'll go all the way back and listen to episode number 1. We see that all the time. The other thing that's absolutely fantastic is let's talk about building contractors, right? Or home builders. There's so many people that they work with, right? They're working with electricians and plumbers and roofers and, custom cabinet makers and plumbers, all of those things. Those are the people you have on the show, right? You, as the owner of the business, interview those people. And here's what ends up happening. If you do it correctly, those guests will share your podcast with their whole network. Because here's why. So let's say you interview a plumber and you're talking about some of the biggest, issues that happen with custom home building or something along those lines, right? So the plumber's like, well, so it's some big problems, hey, we don't have this problem with you as our builder, but with other builders, we have these issues. That plumber is going to share that because it's a 30-minute commercial about how awesome they are as a plumber, man. And so all of a sudden you get access to that entire network. In fact, we have 9 podcast growth tactics. And that's actually one of our major podcast growth tactics to not only help your audience, but bring in that new business.
Okay, so what are some of your other growth tactics? Because now you got me intrigued.
Sure. Well, one of my favorite ones is one called the 12 by 20. And what that means is you're gonna identify your top 12 relationships. Now, this can be vendors, this can be people who do repeat business with you. Those are actually the best of the best. And then you're going to ask them, those 12 best of your best clients, your A++, platinum, silver, whatever you want to call those clients. You're going to ask them what they're passionate about. Right. So let's say they're passionate about wine, right? Wealthy people love wine. So what you do is you say, okay, so what do you want to know about wine? And they're like, well, you know what? I just love to know about the Rhone region and whatever. Okay, so great. So you, as the host and owner of the podcast, will go out and find a sommelier. Right. So this, like, just follow these steps. All right. Find a sommelier, say, hey, I want to interview you for my podcast about the Rhone region and what that really brings to the wine world. Now, you might be saying, well, why would a building contractor want to talk about wine? Because here's why. Because that top 12 client that you have is going to share, they're going to agree to this ahead of time to share that podcast with 20 of their friends, which is going to make you look totally fundamentally different than any other, home builder, contractor, construction person, period. Because who was talking about wine? You're having an intelligent conversation. It shows that you're worldly. It shows that you're interested in what your clients are interested in, and it deepens a relationship with those 12 people, but then also gets you 20 more people listening to your show, and you rinse, lather, and repeat. That's another one of our examples.
I like that. That's a good idea. So I'm going to just pivot another with a different sort of question. And this is sort of like my chicken and the egg question.
Hmm.
Is it better to be a guest on a podcast of someone else's podcast, or is it better to have your own podcast?
You know, that's a magnificent question. And I wish it was as easy as chicken or the egg. I personally think that you should be on another person's show to see if you even like the media itself. If you like being interviewed, if you like using your voice, if that's something that's enjoyable to you. But like, we won't bring people on our shows unless they already have been on other shows or they already have their own podcast. The podcast swap community. I mean, dude, this is why I'm here with you. You're a podcaster. I'm a podcaster. You want me on your show? Great. Let's do it. I'm a known commodity. I've done over 1,000 episodes myself. This is a media that I'm very, very comfortable with. And so I'd like for you to dip your toe in the water. But if you really want to get exposure and get on good shows, you're going to really need to have your own show. Because if not, then you're really just using me to get to your market and also to help with my show. In the podcasting world, there's this strong principle of reciprocity that once you start having your own show and having your own guests, you will never run out of guests. You're never going to need a booking agency or anything like that, because all you have to do is ask the people, hey, who else do you know who should be on our show? So we have a strong strategy. It's actually called OPP, other people's podcasts, right? We have our clients go on other people's shows all the time because, again, it just gets them into a different environment and allows them to use something that they're passionate about, which is their voice, to get their word out in the marketplace and stop them being the best kept secret.
And it's really important that when you're on someone else's show, at least this has been my experience, your job is to make them look good as the host.
Dude, totally. Yeah.
Too often people, I mean, it doesn't happen a lot anymore because I sort of cut it off, but I've had people come on my show and they immediately start making an ad for themselves instead of focusing on delivering value to the audience that they're talking to. For example, you're a great example of this, Matt. Your market is wealth managers, not construction companies.
Nope.
But there happens to be wealth managers that listen to this podcast. And there are construction companies that probably work with wealth managers.
Mm-hmm.
And they may say, gee, we just heard this really interesting guy in this podcast, and you should listen to it. So it's really, my experience is, if you don't really actively think about who you're talking to, you're not going to have a long time as a podcast guest.
Yeah, you're not. The other thing that I think is fascinating, and so I've been on a lot of other industry shows, right? Like people like you who focus on a specific niche. And I think it's so much fun. And I'll get people who reach out afterwards and say, do you think what you do for financial services professionals would actually be applicable within, my specific area of expertise? We've started to have more, and these are more onesie twosies than anything, but like we've got personal injury attorneys who are using our system. We've got technology companies. In fact, it's an HVAC technology company that helps manage their fleet. Why would they have a podcast? Well, because there's so much education that they want to provide to their existing clients and also their prospects about who they are and what they do. We just think that this is a really easy tool. Now, you said something else I got to touch on. We call it the perfect podcast formula. And I want everybody thinking about, if they're ever going to be a guest on the show, these are 4 things that you have to do. All right. The first 3 are not in order, but the last one is the last one for a reason. First one, storytelling. Tell stories. People love stories in podcasts, right? Number 2, be educational. Provide the audience with some good piece of education. 3, hopefully you can be entertaining, because, man, this is a show and you got to be ready to put the jazz hands on and everything. But then the last thing is call to action. If you're selling from the beginning, you look like a schmuck, right? Don't schmuck it out, man. Just be yourself, be open, be honest, be giving of your information. And then if the podcast host or the owner of the podcast gives you an opportunity to pitch, let them set you up to pitch. Don't just immediately start guns a-blazing, because that'll turn everybody off. In fact, man, there are podcasts that I haven't released with very powerful people in financial services because they came on the show. They just pitch. I'm like, dude, you're not adding any value to my audience. I'm not going to publish this episode. So I don't.
Yeah. If somebody does that on my show, I'm one of these argumentative hosts. I have been known to tell guests that I'm going to respectfully disagree with you because that's not right.
Yeah. Well, but that's sort of, so we actually call that the pick a fight system. And that's actually another one of our podcast growth tactics that
Yes.
you should have. If you stand for something, if you believe something and you know it to your heart and experience is true, bring on a contrarian, man. Go toe to toe, as long as the other person knows that you're doing that, right? And go toe to toe and have a polite but passionate conversation. I'm telling you, you're going to start creating fans, man, because other people are going to be like, wow, I really believe the same thing that he does. Or, man, I really like that point that he said against this other person. I love that stuff. Now, not a lot of our clients use that because, as you know, compliance is a big issue in our industry. And everybody's afraid that they're going to go viral for the wrong reason. But I don't know about you, man, but that doesn't happen very much anymore, dude. Like, even if you go viral for a bad reason, it's still amazing press. So if you know how to use it correctly and you know how to spin it, it can be to your advantage. But
If
sorry.
you're disagreeing with somebody, as long as you're not talking about investment performance, compliance doesn't care.
Yeah, remember, they're always working at the lowest common denominator, dude. So that's the biggest issue with most compliance in our industry, because you could not say anything, but if you get close to the line, they basically slap your hand. Your podcast is such a great example. We talked about this at Jolt, right? This is the perfect podcast because you're not talking about performance. You're not talking about any, you're talking about what it's like to work with your ideal client, which in turn is your ideal audience. You want to bring value to them. If they want to ask you other questions, yeah, they set in a freaking appointment, man. I mean, right? Isn't that the goal?
So now you're going to start a podcast, or you're thinking about starting a podcast, and you can do what I did, which was sort of stumble around for the first 4 or 5 months, or you can hire somebody like you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume you would say, gee, you should hire somebody like me because that's what I do. What are some good reasons that somebody should get good advice, at least, before they start a podcast?
It just saves you a bunch of time, man. You and I actually talked about this a little bit, about how you really fumbled for a while and you made some mistakes and some of the audio wasn't the quality that you wanted. And you didn't really know the right equipment or really the right distribution channels. I mean, we were just talking before we came on this, that you're now using this system and you've tried to use other systems. It just accelerates your ability to get your content out. And there's so much out there, dude. That's the best part, right? There's so many companies out there that are providing free education. Here's the deal. We work with financial services professionals. We work in highly regulated industries, right? We're not cheap because we have that level of specialty. So where do you go And what do you do? So there's one thing that I think everybody should do before they ever consider starting podcasts. In fact, there's two. Do you mind if I just go over that real quick? Because I
No,
think this
please,
is
please
valuable.
do.
Okay.
I think
All right.
this is really good stuff.
Right. So the first thing is you have to know who you're talking to. I cannot stress that enough. You can't have a generalist podcast. You can't. It does not work. You don't have the money to market it, and you probably don't have the showmanship to be able to execute that well, right? Which also means you're not going to be the next Joe Rogan, and you all have to get over that. But number two, so you know who you're talking to, right? You have to have that ideal focus. But then the second thing is you have to plan. My favorite thing about people who listen to podcasts, they're generally highly educated, very successful people, whatever that means, right? And one of the ways that you become successful is you know that you have a plan. So, what I want everybody to do right now, unless you're driving and don't do this because you get an accident, but get a piece of paper and write 1 through 12 on a piece of paper and skip every other line. All right. What you're going to do then is you're going to write down the 12 most frequently asked questions that you get in your job. 12 ones that you're like, oh, God, I answer this question all the time. Write it down. And then underneath that, write 3 to 5 sub points underneath that. All right. So what you've just done is you've created 12 outlines for 12 podcasts. What we believe is that if you have some of those organized, especially if you have half a year, because we recommend 2 a month, if you do half a year, right? If you have 12 episodes mindfully in the can on a piece of paper before you ever record, your confidence goes up and your performance level goes up, and you're just going to be more organized. And then you just rinse, lather, and repeat. Okay, so I went through 8 of them. Now I'm going to refresh my 12. What are my next 12? What are my next 12? And when you batch it like that, you're never going to run out of topics. And you're always going to be providing those education, storytelling, call to action format for your show specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of my favorite books is a book by a guy named Marcus Buckingham. It's called They Ask You Tell. And he's one of HubSpot's top agencies. And he used to own a pool company. It's a construction thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he put together a 20-minute video, which was all the questions that he heard from his customers, and he answered them. And before he would send a salesperson out to make a sales call, he would make that prospect watch the video. And it did a couple of things. It essentially said, okay, you watched my video. You're now an educated consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, you watched my video and now you're in.
Yeah.
Because you've put some skin into the game, some time. So we're not going to waste our salesperson's time going out and seeing you. You can do the exact same thing on a podcast.
Yep.
In fact, I think you should do the same thing on a podcast. You should know what's important for your customers and what transformation you would like them to go through, and then find guests that can help explain that transformation.
Yeah.
In a different way than you.
There's 2 things there that I just got to highlight, dude, because that was brilliant and you're spot on. Number one, we have a lot of our clients who actually do that. So what they do is all of you have a discovery process. You get a new prospect in, you have questions to ask, right? So what happens is the advisor answers those questions and then sets up those questions for the prospective client to come in. And so when they come in, their discovery or their sales process went from 5 meetings to 2 because the client already knows who you are, what you do, and what makes you unique and different. And they come in prepared for the meeting. The other thing, so our whole foundation at Proudmouth is a very simple mantra, which is to free the world's experts from the torment of sales. All right. If you do what that HubSpot person did, if you do what great podcasters do or content marketers do, you are going to be providing the education. They are already sold. You do not have to sell them. Do you have to close them? Now, with what can I do to get you in this car today? They're usually coming in pre-sold or pre-closed. So since that meeting, which by the way was an awesome conference, I've had 8 appointments. All right. Now I need to sell about 4 to 6 new clients a month to hit my sales targets. I've closed 3 pieces of business already on 1 phone call. And our product's not cheap, dude. right? And so it's because they know who I am, they know what we do, they've listened to our podcast, they see all of the social proof that's out there. Because that pool guy, if he or she doesn't provide that education, guess what? Somebody else is doing it, dude. Like somebody else has already shot that video. So why aren't you shooting the video? You should be contributing to the thought leadership out there.
So, and if you're listening to this, you don't realize that we are doing this as a simulcast today. We are going out on 4 platforms
Hmm?
while we're recording. So, Matt, is that a good thing to do, or is that a waste of time?
So one of the things that I say all the time is you have to communicate to your ideal client or prospect in the media they prefer while they're there with organic content, right? So if you know that you have people in the world of construction that want to watch live streams, then yes, you absolutely have to be here. And then you take the second question, which is, okay, they want to watch live streams. So therefore, where are they? Are they on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever, right? Twitch, wherever they're going to be. And then you make those decisions accordingly. But we also believe in the Gary Vaynerchuk model of marketing. You do it once and then you chop it up and do a whole bunch of other pieces of content, so that you only have to do it once. So what you're doing, which is super smart, is you're getting really high quality audio here that you can transform into a podcast. You're also getting lots of great video here that is high quality. We're looking at least 1080p, if not 4K, right? That you can repurpose on YouTube or Instagram Reels or Facebook Stories or TikTok or whatever you want, because you're doing it once. You've already done your research to make sure that you're getting the best quality you can, and then you're repurposing the content. We call that content multiplication here. We didn't come up with that name, but that's what we do for our clients. We have them do it once, and then we chop it up into a whole bunch of pieces, and then allow them to post it on whatever social media channels, with the right aspect ratios and making sure that they're pleasing the algorithm and all of that stuff. That stuff works really well. So you're a genius for doing it this way. And I know we talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago in Vegas, but you're way ahead of the game, brother. I mean, you are so far ahead of the game for most people who provide any sort of financial advice, because 1, you've got a perfect niche. Number 2, you're already talking to the niche. And 3, you're putting out great content that's valuable to the people who are listening.
And there's one other thing I've noticed by doing the simulcast is that we have very few people ever watch this stuff live. We have a relatively large amount of people, specifically on YouTube,
Mhm.
who will watch these things after they're done. Because once they're up there, it's just like putting a video up. In fact, it's putting a video up without the work of doing a video, because we do both.
Yep, absolutely, dude.
And I will tell you that podcasts are much less work than doing a one talking head video, which I do every week also.
Mhm.
So, Matt, unfortunately, we have run out of time.
All right.
And I think you are just a fountain of great information about podcasting. And I know folks are going to want to talk to you. So, how do they find you?
Well, so the website is fantastic, proudmouth.com. But really, I live on LinkedIn, everybody. So if you ever have any questions, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast or whatever, just follow me on LinkedIn. If you type in Matthew Halloran or Matt Halloran, I'm probably the first thing that will come up, just because I've been on LinkedIn forever and I have a pretty nice following. And if you have any questions, just direct message me. I respond to everyone myself. My team doesn't do it. I'm the one who responds to all of the messages. So if you ever have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help you rise above the noise and stop being the best kept secret in your area, I would love to help. That's my job.
And I've got 2 things I would like you to do. The first you've heard me say about 361 times now, which is please go to where you're listening to this podcast and give us an honest rating and review. And while you're at it, subscribe. If you subscribe, you get these things automatically sent to you every week, and they're kind of fun to listen to. The way I call it the commute cast. You can listen to on the way to or from work. And the second thing is I've been writing a newsletter now for over 40 years. It went from a mimeograph up to the, using email today, which is really easy compared to mimeographs. For those who are not old enough to know what they are, go look it up. And it's really easy to get it. Just go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/newsletter. That's www.sustainablebusiness.co/newsletter, and you'll get a little form. You put in your first name and your email address, and every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time in the United States, we publish, and you'll get my what I call Josh's musings. And they're not always about business. They could be about anything I find interesting that week. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Matt Halloran. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.